Hey there! We have another beautiful story made especially for you. So subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the bell for many other stories. In a quiet corner of the city, in a small apartment lit only by the cold glow of computer screens, lived a woman who didn't believe in fate. She believed in code, in logic, in patterns. Her name was Ava, and love, to her, was just another formula waiting to be solved. While others chased after romance with flowers and poetry, Ava chased algorithms and machine learning models, while her friends swapped dating horror stories over coffee. She was fin-tuning neural networks and feeding her app data about compatibility metrics. For Ava, love wasn't magiculette, was statistical. She had spent the last 2 years building something she believed could change the dating world forever. An AI-powered matchmaking system that analyzed personality traits, communication styles, social patterns, facial expressions, even micro-expressions in profile videos, and cross-referenced all of that with behavioral science models. It didn't just swipe right or left. It understood human nature, or at least it tried to. She called it HeartSync. It was sleek, smart, ruthlessly efficient, and completely impersonal, just the way Ava liked it. HeartSync wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. The app had launched in beta, and the early results were promising. Matching rates were higher than any of its competitors, and more than one couple had already reported falling in love thanks to HeartSync. Ava should have felt proud, but she wasn't interested in validation from others. She wanted proof from the system itself. One night, driven by curiosity or maybe ego, she decided to run a test on herself. Okay, just for fun. She inputs her complete profile, far more detailed than any user had submitted. Psychological tests, communication logs, social interaction data, even journal entries and metadata from her phone. The AI processed it all in silence, blinking lines of code reflecting off Ava's glasses. Then it gave her a match. One match, 99.7% compatibility. Her fingers froze over the keyboard as the name loaded. She stared and stared. No, absolutely not, she muttered, her voice sharp with disbelief. Because the name that had appeared on the screen wasn't just familiar, it was infuriating. Liam was a UX designer who worked on a rival dating app. They had clashed at a tech conference a year ago during a heated panel discussion about emotional bias in AI systems. He had accused her of trying to turn human connection into a machine's cold suggestion. She had called him sentimental fluff in a turtleneck. It made headlines in niche tech circles. Their argument became a meme. They hadn't spoken since, but Ava hadn't forgotten. How could HeartSync suggest him? Ava ran the data again. Same result. She removed a few variables. Same result. She deleted and reinstalled the app. Still the same. She even tried reversing the matching, logic flipping, emotional compatibility into negative correlationing. Somehow, Liam still showed up. Infuriated, Ava convinced herself it had to be a glitch, or worse, an overfit. And the only way to prove the algorithm wrong, test it in the real world. She opened a blank chat window in her fingers hovered. "This is so stupid," she whispered, but she typed anyway. "Hi," he responded in less than 5 minutes. Ava Is this a bug or a peace treaty? She almost smiled. Almost. Neither. It's a test. One date, prove the system's wrong. A pause. I'm in, but I'm bringing backup. What kind of backup? Sarcasm. You'll need it. And just like that, it began. The date was awkward, predictably. They met at a quiet cafe, filled with books and overly expensive tea. Ava arrived early, scanning the space like a machine scans a server for vulnerabilities. Liam strolled in 5 minutes late, wearing the same cocky grin she remembered and, yes, a turtleneck. They ordered, they talked, and to her dismay, she didn't hate it. Not completely. He was annoying. Sure, confident in that easygoing way that made her itch. But he was also surprisingly attentive. He remembered things she had said in that long-ago argument. He knew she preferred systems over stories. He challenged her without mocking her. And he listened. They ended up walking through the park after talking about everything except dating apps, movies, music, childhood, her father's obsession with Rubik's Cubes, his irrational fear of pigeons. She laughed against her will. As they said goodnight, he looked at her and said, "So, glitch in the system." She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. Back in her apartment, Ava stared at the screen. She opened HotSync's backend and dove into the matching algorithm. She traced every data point that had led the system to suggest Liam. It was airtight, logical, flawless, but something about that terrified her more than if it had been a mistake. Because what if the algorithm wasn't wrong? What if it saw something in her that she hadn't seen in herself? What if Liam was right? Over the next few weeks, Ava found herself seeing him again. Not because of the test. Not because of the app, but because she wanted to. They argued often. She hated how messy his workspace was. He hated her obsession with quantifying everything. But the more time they spent together, the more she realized she didn't want perfect. She wanted real. And maybe that was what HeartSync had known all along. Because love isn't just about symmetry or logic or shared interests. Sometimes love is the anomaly, the unexpected variable, the bug that turns out to be a feature. In the end, Ava didn't rewrite the algorithm. She rewrote her own rules. She updated the app, adding one final message to appear after every match. Even the perfect match needs a leap of faith. And somewhere deep inside her lines of code, her heart finally found its own sync. Every matchmaker knows one golden rule: never fall for your own setup. But what happens when the matchmaker isn't a person, it's a machine? Ava had spent years building HeartSync, a next-gen dating app powered by machine learning and real-time behavior analytics. She designed it not for fantasy, but for reality. Unlike traditional apps that matched people by shared interests or geographical proximity, HeartSync went deeper. It parsed speech patterns, detected micro-emotional responses through facial recognition. It even factored in behavioral projections, how two people might evolve together based on emotional maturity and life goals. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it had just done the unthinkable. It matched her, and not just with anyone but with him. The man she had publicly debated. The one who had mocked her obsession with code and called her a robot wrapped in sarcasm. The one she'd sworn she would never share a conversation with again, let alone a romantic dinner. Liam. The screen stared back at her, bold and undeniable. 99.7% match. Ideal emotional pairing. Her first reaction wasn't shock. It was offense. This had to be a bug, an algorithmic hiccup. Perhaps a weird quirk from the new clustering model she'd integrated last week. She ran a diagnostics check. Then another. She re-weighted the emotion matrix, tweaked the compatibility coefficients, cross-tested with anonymized profiles, tried running it with different neural network models. The result, still Liam, still a 99.7% compatibility rating. It made no sense. He was everything she avoided in real life: spontaneous, disorganized, too empathetic, and unafraid to feel out loud. He believed love was magic, not math. He painted pictures instead of writing plans. He once said in an interview that data can't hug you back. So why would her data-driven masterpiece, the most precise matchmaking system ever created, point directly at him unless it wasn't wrong? But that couldn't be true, could it? The screen pulsed softly, awaiting action. She stared at the blinking cursor in the chat box. She hadn't messaged anyone through the app before. HeartSync wasn't supposed to be about her. It was for the world. For the lonely people who trusted too easily. For those who had tried everything and still ended up ghosted, broken, or worse, settled. She wasn't lonely. She was focused, driven. Still, the thought scratched at her. What if the algorithm saw something she didn't? Was it possible, just possible, that beneath their sharp contrasts, there was chemistry? Maybe not in the conventional way, but in the way fire sometimes meets gasoline. Against her better judgment, Ava typed, "You? Seriously?" His reply came fast. "You finally downloaded it, huh? Or did your AI have a moment of divine comedy? This must be an error." Ouch. Brutal honesty. I respect that. Still, you clicked. I'm testing the limits of a system, not looking for poetry, right? So, this is a debugging date. I'm flattered. She closed the chat, then opened it again. She couldn't help herself. One coffee. For science. Deal. But I'm bringing my sarcasm armor. You tend to throw logic like knives. She smirked. That much was true. They met at a botanical cafe downtown Neutral Ground. The space was lush with plants and softly lit, as if designed for dates and existential crises. Ava arrived early just to observe the place. She had already run simulations in her mind. Awkward silences, smug grins from Liam, a painful exchange of philosophical worldviews. She came prepared with emotional detachment and a tablet full of system data. When he walked in, all those mental rehearsals short-circuited. He looked better than she remembered. Less arrogant, more relaxed, still annoyingly charming, but human, real. "Wow," he said. "The great Eva meets offline. Historic." "Don't ruin it," she replied. They ordered drinks. Hers, black coffee, no sugar. His, lavender oat milk latte, of course. The conversation started stiff, technical. She explained the algorithm's decision tree logic. He challenged her assumptions about emotional randomness. She cited studies. He quoted poetry. She rolled her eyes. But somewhere between mocking emojis and heated debates about predictive modeling, something shifted. Liam told her a story about his first heartbreak, how he created a stupid comic book about it just to process the pain. Eva didn't laugh. She listened, because despite how different they were, she recognized something. He lived with his heart open. And maybe, just maybe that was the part of her the algorithm had seen lacking. He challenged her. Not just her ideas, but her limitations. He forced her to step out of the neatly organized grid of her thoughts. And even when she pushed back, he never shut down. She began to notice his patterns. How he paused before saying something vulnerable. How he touched his ring finger when nervous. How he looked at people, not past them. This wasn't romantic yet. Well, it was. Yeah. Later that night, she replayed the interaction in her mind. Her apartment, once filled only with the hum of servers, now buzzed with conflicting thoughts. She pulled up the compatibility map generated by HeartSync between her and Liam. Emotional resonance, 94% communication pacing, 98% growth projection curve, 99.7% she clicked into the qualitative data clusters. Hundreds of tiny micro matches blinked on the screen moments. Patterns, values that aligned even though the surface screamed otherwise. She leaned back, stunned. The algorithm didn't just match their profiles. It matched their shadows. It understood something deeper, how two people could complement each other not by being the same, but by being strong where the other was vulnerable. She had designed this system, and it had just outsmarted her. The second date wasn't for data. It wasn't for debugging. It was because she wanted to see him again. They talked less about algorithms and more about life. She told him things she hadn't told anyone, like how she used to build imaginary worlds with her brother using spreadsheets as blueprints. How she hated the unpredictability of people because it reminded her of childhood chaos. He listened. No interruptions. No pity. Just presence. And he told her about how his mother left when he was 10, and how art became his only way of not fading. By the third meeting, it wasn't about proving or disproving anything. It was about connection. They still argued constantly, but it wasn't destructive, it was electric. And in those fiery exchanges, Ava felt something unfamiliar. She felt alive. Weeks passed. She stopped tweaking the app. Dot stopped obsessing over optimization. Instead, she started adding a new feature journal prompt for users after their third date. The first prompt read, "What surprised you about this connection?" For Ava, the answer was simple. Everything. She and Liam are far from perfect. But the algorithm never promised perfection. It promised potential, possibility. And somewhere in that 99.7%, Eva found a 0.3% that no machine could measure. Joy. Because in the end, it wasn't the code that made the connection stick. It was the decision to lean into stay. When it was easier to retreat, to grow together, to fight fair, to laugh through tension, to trust what couldn't be calculated. And sometimes the most perfect match feels impossible at first glance. But that's the magic of a system that understands you better than you understand yourself. Not by predicting your path, but by showing you who you could become if you're brave enough to say yes. There are some moments in life that don't feel real, even when they're happening. For Ava, this was one of them. She sat across from Liam, the man she had argued with, disliked, dismissed, and all but sworn off in her mind, and now here they were, on a date. Technically, not a date she wanted, not a date she asked for, and definitely not one she expected. It was a challenge, a final test to expose the flaw in her life's work. Heartsink, her pride in creation, had matched her with Liam at 99.7% compatibility. She couldn't accept that, wouldn't. So she did what Ava always did when she was challenged by the unexpected. She dove in, not to discover love, but to dismantle the illusion. One date, one chance to prove the algorithm was wrong. The cafe was neutral territoria, place where neither had the upper hand. Quiet enough for conversation, cozy enough to soften edges. The kind of space where people went to connect, to start stories, to fall slowly. But Ava wasn't here for stories. She was here for data. Her plan was simple. Be herself, 100% authentically cold, analytical, and unfiltered. No charming pretense. No polite small talk. She'd expose the incompatibility in no time. When Liam walked in, he looked exactly like she remembered, relaxed, confident, impossibly. He had the look of someone who didn't take life too seriously. And that alone irritated her. "Hey," he said casually, "you look tense." "That's new." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You're late." "I brought a peace offering," he said, sliding a pastry across the table. "I remembered you don't like sweet things, so I picked the most bitter item they had." She blinked. "You remembered that?" "Of course." He shrugged. "You told me during that panel, between calling me emotionally unstable and accusing me of weaponizing metaphors." She fought a smile. "Just barely." "Let's get this over with," she said, sipping her black coffee like it was ammunition. The first 30 minutes were brutal. Every topic led to a disagreement. She brought up algorithmic biases. He argued for emotional intuition. She quoted studies. He quoted his neighbor's love story. She rolled her eyes. He smirked. Ava tracked every interaction like data points, emotional misfires, conversational delays, unmatched values. And yet, every time she tried to poke a hole in the system's reasoning, something strange happened. Liam responded better than expected. When she was curt, he laughed. When she dismissed his opinions, he leaned in and asked why she felt that way. He wasn't just tolerating her intensity. He was engaging with it. And for the first time in years, Ava realized she didn't have to explain herself. He just got it. She found herself talking more than she meant to. She told him how she'd started building Heartsink after watching two close friends destroy a decade-long relationship because of poor communication. How she'd decided that emotion needed structure, that love needed a map. "I wanted to stop people from getting hurt," she said softly. "And do you think you have?" he asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." Liam leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on hers. "Maybe you were trying to build something that you needed yourself." That struck deeper than she expected. After the cafe, they walked. No destination, just movement. The city buzzed quietly around them. The night was warm, filled with static energy that neither of them addressed. They talked about everything except relationships. Childhood memories, their favorite failures, the worst thing they ever created, the most embarrassing thing they still loved. At some point, Ava realized she had forgotten to collect mental notes. She had stopped analyzing. She was just being. Liam stopped beside a small street mural. It was a chaotic explosion of colors, almost offensive in its lack of structure. He looked at her. You still think the algorithm's wrong. She opened her mouth, but no answer came, because this wasn't what she expected. And deep down, she didn't want it to end. Back in her apartment, Ava opened her laptop. The HeartSync dashboard glowed in the dark. She pulled up their compatibility matrix again. There it was. Every data point, every projection, every piece of logic that said she and Liam were a match. But it wasn't the numbers that haunted her now. It was the silence when she thought about not seeing him again. It was the warmth in her chest when she remembered his stupid lavender latte. It was the way he listened, not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone waiting to understand. Could this system actually be right? Or was it something else? She closed the laptop. Not everything needed to be answered in code. Over the next week, they met again, then again, then again, always under the guise of casual curiosity. Each time, she expected it to break, to find the flaw, the mismatch, the thing that made it impossible, but she never did. Instead, she started discovering things she hadn't looked for. How he softened when he talked about his little sister. How he doodled on napkins when he was thinking. How he hated cucumbers and loved thunderstorms. Every moment chipped away at her certainty. She once believed that only structure could protect people from heartbreak. But now, she was learning that vulnerability wasn't a bug, it was the code that made the connection real. Then came the night they fought. A real fight. She accused him of being too emotionally reactive. He told her she was hiding behind logic because she was afraid of feeling anything. It was sharp. It was ugly. It was real. They didn't talk for 2 days. And in that silence, Ava felt something she hadn't expected. Loss. Not just of the data, not just of the test, which having, not because the system told her they were compatible, but because she had grown to care deeply, not based on logic, but based on something no machine could measure. When they finally met again, neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Leah said, "I'm not perfect for you, Ava. We don't need perfect." She nodded slowly. "Maybe we just need honest." And in that moment, she let go. Not of the algorithm, not of her principle, but of the need to control every outcome. She allowed herself to feel, to risk, to try. Later, when she updated the HeartSync app, she added a new disclaimer beneath every match result. Compatibility isn't a guarantee. It's a door. What you do after that is your choice, because now she knew the truth. No system, no matter how smart, could predict how hard someone was willing to try. No code could measure the moments when you choose each other, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, even when it's uncertain. Especially then. Ava's attempt to disprove the algorithm had done the opposite. It proved something she never expected, that sometimes When everything inside you says no, life whispers, try. And if you listen carefully, that's where the real story begins. In the digital world, a firewall is a line of defense, a barrier between what's allowed in and what must be kept out. In Ava's world, firewalls weren't just in her software, they were in her soul. Cold, precise, impeccably designed. She had spent her life behind walls, built from logic, from control, from formulas that made everything manageable. Her app, HeartSync, was the crown jewel of that mindset, a fortress of compatibility, scoring, and algorithmic truth, created to predict love and protect people from emotional chaos. But now, something strange was happening. Liam, the very person she had labeled as emotionally chaotic, was getting past her defenses. And it wasn't supposed to be possible. It started small. Little things. Things the algorithm couldn't quantify, like the way he looked at her when she wasn't speaking. Not with expectation, but with patience. Or how he never rushed to fill the silence. He just let it be. Ava, who had always measured the efficiency of conversations by how quickly they got to the point, found herself wanting to linger in those silences. She started to notice that her heart would stutter slightly before seeing him. Her thoughts, usually sharp and orderly, had begun to tangle, even skip when he was around. She couldn't focus when he smiled. She didn't want to. She'd return home after their meetings and sit in the dark for hours, staring at her code, wondering why she felt so exposed. Like someone had found a crack in her system and crawled inside without permission. And maybe she had let him in. One night, Ava was working late in the HeartSync lab, monitoring user feedback loops and updating the communication style filters. She should have been satisfied. The app's success rate was rising. Positive testimonials were flooding in. The media was calling her the woman who coded love. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt conflicted because here she was, championing a system that promised to make love predictable, safe, while experiencing a connection that was anything but. When the AI had paired her with Liam, she thought the system had failed. But what if it hadn't? What if it saw beyond her projections? What if, in its deep analysis of who she was, beneath the engineer, beneath the skepticism, it recognized something she didn't. And not for perfection, not for control, but for someone who would challenge her firewall and make her feel things she had buried long ago. They met again at the lake near the city. She wasn't sure why she chose that spot. Maybe because it was quiet. Still, a space where noise couldn't hide emotion. He brought coffee. She brought her restlessness. They sat on the dock in silence for a while. Dinky asked softly, "Are you okay?" Ava hesitated. Lying would be easy, logical, but she didn't want easy anymore. She looked at the water. "I don't know what I'm doing with you. With this." He didn't interrupt. "I built HeartSync to protect people," she continued, "to help them avoid this, the confusion, the fear, the way it feels like everything's out of control." Liam nodded slowly. "And yet, here you are, feeling," she swallowed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No," he said. "It wasn't supposed to happen at all. That's what makes it real." She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Aren't you scared?" He looked at her, and for once, all the sarcasm was gone. "Of course I am. That's how I know it matters." Something inside her cracked. Then, just a little. Enough for the light to start leaking in. Over the next few weeks, the connection deepened in ways Ava never anticipated. They argued still. Their styles were opposites. She was structured. He was spontaneous. She needed facts. He thrived on instinct. But underneath the friction, there was intimacy. He showed her how to sit in discomfort without trying to solve it. She taught him how to name what he felt, to map the emotion before reacting. They were learning each other, moment by moment, not as projections. The app had brought them together, yes, but now they were navigating uncharted territory. No algorithm, no system, just raw human vulnerability. And Ava began to realize something. Her firewall wasn't keeping danger out. It was keeping life out. One evening, she invited Liam into her workspace, a place she'd never let anyone enter. He looked around, wide-eyed at the cables, the charts, the eerie glow of hundreds of screens pulsing with code. "It's like walking into your mind," he said. She smiled nervously. "That's exactly what it is." On one monitor, their own compatibility profile was still active. He pointed to it. Still 99.7%. She nodded. "It hasn't changed." "And yet," he said, "we've changed." She paused. "Class. Dados é parte redam. The effect they people change. They grow. They break. They shift. No system, not even hers, could predict that with certainty." She turned to him. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the point of the algorithm isn't to predict love. Maybe it's just to get people to the door, and the rest," he said, "is up to us." She nodded, her voice trembling. "I think I'm finally ready to walk through it." And she meant it. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about risk. She was thinking about possibility. In the following days, Ava made a decision. She wouldn't abandon Harsing, but she would redefine it. She rewrote the mission statement on the app's homepage. HeartSync doesn't promise certainty. It promises a beginning, because love isn't a solution, it's a journey. She also added a feature called Cracks, a place where users could log emotional breakthroughs, big or small, the little moments that couldn't be measured in numbers but meant everything. Like, "She laughed when I least expected it. He stayed when I shut down. I said sorry first. I felt safe." It became the most used feature on the app within weeks, because people weren't just looking for, they were looking for the proof of vulnerability. And Ava was no longer hiding from hers. Liam never asked her to change, but she changed anyway. Not for him, for her. Because somewhere along the way, she realized that the strongest system wasn't one that shielded you. It was one that allowed connection through the cracks. The parts where light could get in. The parts where love could take root. Not perfect, not calculated, but real, messy, uncertain, beautiful. And in that chaos, Ava finally found what her algorithm had seen long before she did. That sometimes the perfect match isn't the one who fits your expectations, It's the one who finds their way through your firewalls and stays. There's a moment in every story when the foundation begins to crack. Not from outside pressure, but from within. A quiet shift. An unexpected question. A doubt that blooms slowly. Then, all at once. For Ava, that moment came late on a Sunday night. The apartment was still. Her monitors glowed softly, like silent witnesses to the storm brewing inside her. She sat in her usual chair, fingers frozen over the keyboard. On the screen was something she had seen hundreds of times before. Compatibility matrix 99.7% match. Liam Carter. She had designed the very algorithm that generated this result. She knew every function, every variable, every psychological heuristic embedded in the code. She had created this world, a world where love could be mapped, modeled, measured, and yet she felt lost in it. Since that first date with Liam, the test she'd intended to disprove the system, things had changed. Not all at once. Slowly, like water finding cracks in a dam. He was still infuriatingly spontaneous. Still too warm, too intuitive, too unpredictable. But he was also kind and grounded. And, worst of all, real. Every time he looked at her, Ava felt like he wasn't just seeing her. He was understanding her, beyond her posture, beyond her defense mechanisms, beyond the logic, and that scared her more than any failed system ever could, because logic had always protected her. Until now. One night, she met him on the rooftop of his apartment. The city lights shimmered below, and for a moment, it felt like the world had paused. He handed her a cup of tea. No words, just presence. And then, with no warning, he asked, "Do you believe people are meant to be together?" She laughed. "That's such a vague question. Define meant, define together, define..." He smiled. "I'm not asking your algorithm. I'm asking you." She hesitated, because she wasn't sure anymore. All her life, Ava had trusted systems. They were safi predictable, clean, but Liam didn't fit into any of that. He was an anomaly, an emotional paradox wrapped in disorganized charm. She wanted to say no, but something softer escaped. "I used to think no. That love was a result of timing, compatibility, mutual work, nothing magical, nothing faded." She looked at him, really looked, and whispered, "Now I'm not so sure." That was the beginning of the unraveling. She began to notice how the rules she'd clung to were flawed, not in their logic, but in their limitations. She had built HeartSync with the belief that emotional chaos could be contained, but Liam wasn't chaos. He was honest, and honesty doesn't follow algorithms. The next day, she returned to her workspace and stared at the app's backend. She opened the logs of users whose matches had failed after perfect scores to 97%, 98%, even 100%. She had always dismissed those failures as statistical outliers. But now, she read them differently. These weren't malfunctions. They were stories. People who panicked when they saw their perfect match. People who fell in love despite low compatibility. People who ghosted, who tried, who failed, who felt, because love wasn't about certainty. It was about courage. Later that night, Ava and Liam sat in her apartment, surrounded by wires and screens and silence. She turned to him and said something she never thought she would. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" he asked gently. "Us. This. The whole emotional part. I keep trying to make it efficient, rational. And it's not." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he simply said, "Good. If it was, it wouldn't be real." She stared at him. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Stop trying to solve it. Just live it." Those words haunted her in the best way. She realized that her logic had always been a shield, but Liam was asking her to lower it, not to destroy it, but to let something else in. Trust, risk, emotion. They took a weekend trip. Her first spontaneous decision in years. She didn't pack a detailed itinerary. She didn't plan the route. She just followed. And for 2 days, she let go. They wandered through quiet towns, ate street food, argued over music, got caught in the rain. She laughed more than she had in years. Not because everything went right, but because she stopped trying to control it. And when they returned, she knew something had changed. Not just in her, but in how she saw the world. Ava sat down to rewrite a section of the HeartSync code. Not to fix it or evolve it. She added a new line to the post-match guidance message. Love is not the result of compatibility. Compatibility is the invitation. The rest is a leap of heart. She added a feature that allowed users to journal their fears, not just their hopes. A place to say, "I'm scared to be seen. I've been hurt before. I want this, but I don't trust it yet." She wanted people to feel like they weren't failing if love didn't feel perfect from day one, because the algorithm could point the way, but the journey that belonged to them. One evening, after dinner, Ava turned to Liam and asked, "Why didn't you run from me?" From this, he grinned. "I wanted to 100 times, but I didn't." Why? Because I saw something under your code. A fire, a softness you pretend isn't there. She was quiet. Then, "I'm still scared." "Me too," he said. "Let's be scared together." And just like that, the girl who had trusted only logic chose emotion. Not blindly, not recklessly, but intentionally. In the end, Ava didn't abandon her system. She expanded it. She taught HeartSync to embrace what couldn't be meso, and she taught herself to live without always needing to know the outcome. She and Liam weren't perfect. They argued. They misunderstood each other. They grew, sometimes in different directions, but they chose to grow together. And every day, she thanked the algorithm, not for solving love, but for giving her a reason to feel it. In every system, there comes a time when the code must change. Not because it's broken, but because the world it once served has evolved. Ava sat alone in her workspace, the soft hum of machines filling the room like a heartbeat. Around her were the remnants of years of dedication. Sketches of algorithm models, neural pattern maps, books on behavioral psychology, and notebooks full of cold, neat equations. Everything in this room had once been a fortress, a sanctuary. Now, it felt like a museum, because Ava had changed, and that meant the system had to change too. It had been months since HeartSync matched her with Liam. At first, she thought it was a mistake, then a test, then a glitch, and finally, she understood. It was a mirror, the system she had built, the one designed to bypass randomness and reveal true compatibility, had reflected back the one truth Ava had spent years avoiding. That love wasn't something you solved. It was something you chose again and again, even when it was messy, even when it made no sense. Especially then, she looked at the app's main interface, polished, minimalist, elegant, too perfect. Ava had designed HeartSync to minimize emotional failure, but now she saw the cost of that intention. It also minimized emotional courage. It gave people the illusion that love was a guarantee, a path of high probability outcomes, but Liam had shown us something different. Love was effort. It was imperfection. It was waking up and choosing someone even when it's hard, when it's uncertain, when logic says run. She and Liam had fought. They had grown apart, then come back stronger. Not because the numbers kept them together, but because they decided to keep showing up. It wasn't the 99.7% match that mattered. It was the 0.3% of unpredictability, the mystery, the freedom, the spark of humanity. So Ava did what no one expected. She rewrote the rules. The next HeartSync update was unlike anything the platform had ever released. First, she introduced a feature called Emotional Replay. It allowed users to reflect not on their compatibility score, but on the emotional moments they experienced in real time. It tracked no data. It didn't make predictions. It simply prompted users to record one truth after every meeting. What surprised you? What scared you? What made you feel alive? Next, she changed the language of the app. No more perfect match. Instead, promising beginning. No more high probability of long-term success. Instead, opportunity for connection, if you're willing to try. And most importantly, she added a message on every result screen. The algorithm can show you the door, but only you can walk through it. The feedback was immediate. Some users were confused, others frustrated. They missed the old language of guarantees and predictions. But then something started to shift. People began to share more. They weren't just swiping. They were writing journal entries, uploading voice notes, sharing heartbreaks and hopes, admitting fears, talking about grief and shame and laughter. The platform became less about finding the one and more about learning to be ready for the one or many that might come. It became human, just like Ava. One night, months into the relaunch, Ava and Liam sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and old laptops. He watched her finish the new launch video, a message to HeartSync's users. In it, she didn't appear as a tech genius, not as the woman who solved love, but as someone who had once tried to hide from it. "I thought I could protect people from heartbreak," she said on screen. "But I forgot something important. Love is supposed to break us sometimes. It's how we grow. It's how we soften. It's how we remember that we're alive. The video faded to black. Liam looked at her. You just told the world your secret. She smiled. Maybe it was time. Scared, terrified. He reached for her hand. Good, he said. Let's be terrified together. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It didn't end with a wedding or a dramatic kiss in the rain. It continued in late-night talks, in disagreements that ended in growth, in quiet mornings making coffee, in holding space for each other's shadows. They didn't always get it right, but they always came back to the same question. Do we still choose this? And the answer, again and again, was yes. Years later, HeartSync wasn't the same app. It was a movement, a platform not just for matching, but for mending, for reconnecting people not only to each other, but to themselves. Ava would often get messages from users saying things like, I didn't find the love of my life, but I found someone worth fighting for. Your app taught me how to love myself first. We're still growing, still struggling, but we're doing it together. She would read each one slowly, quietly, and sometimes she would think back to that first result, that glitch, that anomaly, that match, and smile. Because she knew now it was never about finding someone who completed her. It was about finding someone who saw her and stayed. Love, she learned, isn't an equation. It's a decision. A messy, miraculous, terrifying decision. And sometimes the greatest acts of intelligence is letting your heart lead the way. And that's the end of another story. Thank you very much.